smaller session, but there are still things that people are unsure of and need a reminder of. So I think now's a great time just before that last influx of marking. So Lachlan, I guess, I mean, we haven't even spoken. I'm just trusting that you know what to teach as you have for the last year. But I do think probably we need to let some time for people to ask questions, because I reckon everyone who's here will probably have some questions to ask. So that'd be great. I'll leave you to manage it how you would like to, whether you want just questions at the end or questions as we go through. That's completely up to you. But thank you so much again. And if we were in the same town, I would be sending you a box of wine or chocolates or
flowers. Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I suppose the first thing I'll just sort of let you know is in terms of what I'm doing this year. Last year was kind of all Brightspace and the project and that sort of thing. I have returned to my substantive role in the Teaching Academy, which ironically is more Brightspace and more PD and sessions, but we're returning to the traditional sort of 10-week block of PD that we run from week -3 of each teaching session through until the mid-session breaks in session 30 and session 60. So I guess look out for the programs for those in the coming week. There'll be plenty of messaging in and around that, but yeah, Tuesday and Thursday mornings. So enough of a plug on that. There'll be plenty of Brightspacey stuff in there, as well as other things about robots coming to take over and all the rest of it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about marking this morning. One of the main kind of line items that people had asked about was marking offline. And for a number of people, obviously that legacy process that we had with EASE of bulk downloading, doing our marking, or our markers doing their marking wherever they were, and then getting that back into the system and back to the students, and how feedback is provided, how grades are provided, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to work through what that process looks like in Brightspace now. I don't really stand on ceremony, so if you have questions along the way, by all means, either put your hand up and I'll get to you, or put it in the chat, or Sarah can pull me up, or anyone else. I'm not precious about any of those things. The session is being recorded, so if you're going to abuse me, by all means, just note you're going on the record. So let's get into it a little bit. I'm going to start with the process, and then I'll sort of pause and see what people really want to dig into at that point. So look, I'm in a faux teaching site, so to speak. We have a number of assignments in here. We have a fairly small cohort of students, all 9 of them, and I have set up a portal for us to have a look at what offline marking looks like. And I can see that there are a number of submissions already from this assignment dashboard. What else can I see? It's linked to the gradebook. That little ribbon there tells me that it's been set up for marking and that it's a Turnitin assignment. Everyone fairly comfortable with this sort of interface at this point? I can see a nod or two. Okay, great. Let's open up the marking portal. And the first thing I want to point out is that normally you're going to be coming into this space looking at a full list of the students in this user tab, whether or not they have submitted or not. So I've got some that have, some that haven't. It looks like they've plagiarized horribly from the Turnitin scores that are here, but I have some submissions going in. Now, where I want to take it from here is from the perspective of one of your markers, for example, who's got to do their allocation. So in this case, what I actually got is some groups that I've set up for marking. And if I change my view, I think the first thing I'm going to do actually is change my role, because you may have seen in some of the dialogue going backwards and forwards, any of your markers that want to go through this process to be able to not only download student submissions, but also provide those files back into the system and edit their grades in the gradebook, for example, need the additional academic role as a minimum. So convener, coordinator, additional academic. If you don't have one of those 3 roles, you're not going to be able to do this process in full. And that's probably something more for the subjects team, for the conveners and things to think about. But if you ever get the academic saying, I can't see any of them, or I can't do this, it's most of the time going to be about the role that they've been added to the system with. So I'm in here as an additional academic or a marker at this point. Now, I'm one of 3 markers in this particular assignment, and the convener has set up marking teams. So I'm going to switch across to my groups view by groups. And the groups I've set up, in this case, I have marking teams set up and I am marker. Let's go with marker 1. That's fine. I can hit apply. And now I'll only see my allocation. In this case, it's 3 students. 2 of them have submitted, 1 of them has not. All right, so I'm going to do my marking. And the way that we get our assignments offline to have a look at them is select all. So the checkbox that we have here in the top left, and then we hit download. What this is going to do is give me a batch download file, a zip file. So hit download. Okay, it's ready. I hit download, and now that file is here. And I'm going to show you, if I bring my Explorer across, you can see the name of the file. I hope this isn't too small. Has the name of the assignment portal, and then it also has the date at which you've downloaded it. That's what's going into the labeling of that file. And my first instruction in this process is do not change this name. Leave the zip file name alone. Leave it intact as a zip file. That's the first thing. Now, if I double click and open this file up, what I can see in here is that for every student submission in here, it has created a unique folder with the student's identifier in Brightspace and the date the student submitted their paper, the date and time. So that marker that's next to their name is when they submitted and the time they submitted. So at a glance, that's what's going into it. And I'm going to repeat that instruction from before. Don't touch the name of these folders inside. We leave the structure intact. All right, next up, we open up one of the individual student submissions. And finally, we've got to their Word document. Right, so there's the document that the student has submitted for the assignment. At that point, I can open that up. It's opening Word in another screen. I'll drag that across. Anytime now. Okay, so here's Word. Let's just edit it. Let's assume that looking at this document, you've got an academic that's going through and potentially highlighting things maybe and putting comments on things. So this part, horrible, etc. Put that in. Let's go through, and they're basically marking at that point, going through those Word documents. Now this has opened that file up directly from within the zip folder. You'll notice that I haven't extracted anything. I didn't extract or expand the zip folder. I've just clicked through, opening up the student name, the student document, and I've started just making changes directly to the student's document from this point. If I hit save, I can go straight over the top of that document with exactly that same file name. No, it doesn't like it because it's read-only. Well, that's terrible. Well, in that case, let's change this. You may remember from your East days when we were putting things like marked and changing with underscores and other things under the file name. So that's been done. I'm going to get out of Word. Where's that document gone? Did anyone see where I saved it to? Let's go in again. I'm not sure why it saved it as a read-only. You should be able to modify this. Saved it to this PC. Where did I save it? Normally, I just add directly to the same file in the same folder. There's no issue there. And when I hit save, it has amended the file directly inside this folder. There's no need for you to replace it with other files. You can simply edit and change it directly from here. I must have something else going on there. Now, the point I want to make is, let's assume that you've got other files and feedback that you want to provide back to the student, whether it's a marked or annotated version of the document or other documents, PDFs, feedback, templates, other forms, rubric documents, I don't know, other types of documents you want to provide as feedback to these students, you can drag them into this same folder. Again, I haven't expanded or extracted anything. I've done it from directly within the zip folder. So what I'm going to do at that point is drag some in. Let me just find another document that I can get. Let's see. Any PDF at all? Desktop, documents, downloads, this will do. We'll grab a PowerPoint, an Excel document for no real reason, that'll do. Yeah, that'll do. Take those, I'm going to copy them, and now I'm going to add them to that folder that I just had a moment ago, which will be in downloads, in the folder, in with Alice. Okay, so I have copied in 2 other documents that I'm going to provide as feedback to this one student into that same zip file. If I close this, all of those files, that zip folder is now sitting on my computer, ready to be batch uploaded back to the student. So at that point, the way that we do that is we click on Add Feedback Files. It's looking for that zip file with that naming convention that we had before. So let's find it. Downloads, there it is. Open that. And I'm going to click Add. So whilst this processes, and obviously the more students you have, the more files that are in there, the longer that upload is going to take, but it has added 4 files. And we'll see now that if we open up Alice Logan's evaluation, not only do we have her original submission sitting over here, but underneath all of those feedback files have been added to the evaluation. Right, so you can do that for every student that's in that folder. Add your feedback files, mark up the Word documents, etc., and add any other documents, templates, etc., and bulk upload them using that Add Feedback Files process. Now, those have gone in, and it has left the student submission in draft. So at that point, we've done our offline marking. We haven't provided a grade yet. And I'm going to stop there in the process and see what kind of questions we've got going on or what people want to ask before I start talking about publishing, grades, and the next part in this this process. So who wants to go?
Can I just ask something?
Please.
So we still have to individually go into each file and pop in their marks and a little spiel. So even though we're batch uploading them, we can't go into like we used to in Grade Centre and throw all their marks in. Is that?
You can. I'm going to show you that step in a minute, how to go into the Grade Centre. I guess what I wanted to demonstrate was what was happening to those individual student evaluations when you worked through this process. So you don't have to open this if you don't want to. I'm just, I guess, pointing out that you can download all of the student files and you can batch upload all of them after you've finished marking with any other files. And the effect that it has in the system is it's added those documents and any of the changes that you've made back into that student's file. Sarah.
Thanks, Lachlan. One question I know I've had a few times is that the files are very big or there might be PowerPoints or posters, and people are having difficulties downloading. So are there any hints or tips on that?
Look, file size is kind of a problem in just about any system, I suppose, when you're trying to grab them at scale. You know, if someone's got a cohort of less than 100 students, for example, it's going to be easier than 800. And if they're dealing with multimedia, particularly assignment types where they've got voice over PowerPoint or video or media, it's going to blow out those file sizes again. Multiple files. I don't know that there's a tip around this, apart from if you get to the point where you need to download them in batches, for example, where you're actually only selecting 10 at a time or 20 at a time, reducing that number if you're having difficulty with the load times instead of download all. And if I go into our submissions view and have a look, if I was looking at all the students, so let's change the view to the users. Right, so I've got 4 there. Let's say that they were horrendously big. Maybe I only need to get 2 at a time or something. 10 at a time, 20 at a time. I don't have a number for you specifically, but what I'm saying is if download all is giving you problems, deal with a smaller number and then hit download up here rather than getting all of them. That's about the only tip I have for you in that space, short of wanting to get into a discussion around what types of media, what types of files, how many students. You know, it can blow out a little bit.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lachlan.
That's okay. Any other questions, comments before we start digging into the grading process?
So there's a question from Rachel in the chat wondering about Turnitin when allowing a PowerPoint link via OneDrive. These are not then processed.
Right, so this comes down to the submission type when you set up the assignment. If we look at the actual assignment settings that we have here, the type under your submission and completion settings, the type of submission we've got going on is a file submission. And then really the question of Turnitin yes or no comes down to the type of file extensions that are accepted. Normally when we're asking students to upload a file and we want a Turnitin score for every file that is being submitted, we would be telling you to submit annotatable files as the file type because all of those will be put through Turnitin. The complexity comes when we have other types of files that we are allowing into submission, and people have students submitting images or movie files or audio files or all sorts of things coming through. That obviously opens us up to risk of things not processing properly or not getting Turnitin scores and things like that. By and large, as long as you stick to file submission and annotatable files, that will give you Turnitin scores for every item submitted. But if they literally will not be able to submit anything that isn't one of those file types.
Okay,
that's
cool.
If you've got links to things, they're not going to be put through Turnitin. If it's a student submission where they're just providing hyperlinks. The way that we get a score with this integration is file submission and annotatable files. Yep.
Beautiful. And the last question for this section, Lino's asked, if I go into participants, there is an option at the top to invite people. Can I add marking teams so they can then have access to this recording?
Oh, we're talking about Teams. Sorry,
Yeah,
I was thinking in Brightspace. There's a participants
I know, I'm
area.
thinking of Brightspace too. Sorry, Lino. Yes, I'll fix that after. That's fine.
No worries. I'm quite happy for anybody to have the recording. I'm going to download it and stick it in YouTube. So you've got a link to give to people if you like, Sarah. That might be the
beautiful. Thank you.
The way to go.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about the grade aspect. We've batch downloaded and batch uploaded. So we've dealt with that part of the equation, and now we've got to deal with grading. As we talked about a minute ago, yes, you can go into individual student evaluations in the list and put in grades. But at that point, why were you batch downloading and uploading anyway if you're going to open them individually? So I completely get that question. You want to do them with a top-down view and put in your grades. So again, I'll reiterate that earlier instruction. As long as you've been added with additional academic and above, convener, coordinator, additional academic, you will be able to do this step that I'm going to show you. And that involves going into the gradebook. So we're no longer touching the assignment portal because we've batch downloaded and batch uploaded our feedback. It's still in draft. I can now go into my gradebook, which will be under my subject, my grades. First column I've got in here is the assignment that I've been marking. It is showing me every student in the cohort, which might not be that useful. So again, I'm going to switch my view up here to show me my marking team. So I'm going to go to groups, hit apply. And in this case, I've got my marking teams and I'm marker 1. So it's now going to reduce that list of 9 down to the 3 that I need to put a grade in for. And at that point, I can put in a grade directly into the gradebook as long as I'm looking at the gradebook in spreadsheet view. So if I'm speaking French here, the difference between standard view and spreadsheet view up the top, standard view, you can't make any change to grades, but you can see when there is a submission that the students have made, hence that icon that's next to those two students' names. Spreadsheet view, which I'm going to switch to, here is our direct entry.
Hang on, before you stop. Oh.
Stop. Okay, I'll go back. Yep, no problem.
Sorry, yes. The little red dot. See, in assessment 2 report, there's obviously the student has submitted, but there's a little red dot. What does that little red dot mean?
I haven't looked at it yet. Unread.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yep, that's the difference. I've opened these at some point or looked at them or done something to them. With this one, I haven't. That's what the red dot's for.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
That's okay. Let's switch back to our direct entry view, at which point I can put scores directly in here for all of them, I guess, at the same point. So let's say for Alice Logan, in my marking somewhere, I'd written down that she'd got 26.5 out of 35, for example, and I've put it in. As soon as I click outside that and hit save, this mark will now be published. And this is where we need to stop and talk about what publishing means in Brightspace. Okay, it's no longer in draft. It's no longer in that space where the student doesn't know what's going on. It will instantly, by default, notify the student. They get an email saying it's been marked. It's ready for you to have a look at underneath my grades, back in the assignment portal, etc. Done, published. And that means that you may then have questions coming at that point saying, why did I fail this? Why did I get this? I want to talk about this, which, you know, we have at that point, we have to talk about how we mitigate that kind of instant update process. This is why we have the assignment process within Brightspace marking within the assignment dashboard, because it allows us to have draft marking as much as we like before we publish all. With the gradebook, that kind of concept is a little bit more difficult to achieve. One way of approaching it is to actually hide the column, like we used to in I2, hiding your grade columns until you're ready. That will stop the student from being able to see their grade in my grades. It doesn't stop the student from getting an email that says it's been marked and then them emailing you saying, I got an email saying it's marked and I can't see it now. So it's only half of the equation. Publishing in Brightspace is a bit of a complex sort of situation. So it basically says to me that maybe you want to have your marking ready and done before you enter your grades in here. That's my first take on this. So if I hit save, Alice Logan, whoever she is, and that is a real person, will get that notification. And that's now done. If I went back into the assignment portal to see how this looks on the front end, so to speak, into marking offline and find Alice in here somewhere, you can see that her status is now published. So that marking is complete. The student has been notified the gradebook has been updated. Let's stop there for a second and see what kind of questions we've got in that space, comments, etc. Anybody?
So I'm happy to call out chat questions. So Belinda's asked, with the batch uploading the marked copies, can I double check you can't change any of the file names?
The files that you add in or add back doesn't matter. You can call them whatever you like. Any of the files that you are batch uploading, it's the folder structure that you can't change. So you can't change the name of the folders that the files sit within. The actual documents that sit in there, doesn't matter. It's the folder names that are the important thing, and that's how Brightspace knows where to put these things.
Okay, great. Then Jody, how do we put students into marking groups? So that's backtracking a little bit. Yeah.
I can show you that. Look, the simplest way to deal with that is you set up new groups. I usually just set up some generic ones which will split up the cohort into smaller blocks. But how you go about this in terms of numbers is completely up to you. The way that you create marking groups in Brightspace is you go into the groups tool, which you can get to through the communication menu and groups. And then this is one that I've set up previously, but normally when we set them up, we go new category, which means new group set. That's the Brightspace language for a group set. I'm going to call this demo marking teams. Students will be able to see the name of any group that they get added to. So you might want to think about that in terms of the labeling of these. So don't call a group something like potentially failing students or something like that. You know, like give it a name that is relatively safe. They will not be able to communicate with anyone else in the group, but they can certainly go and see in the groups tool which groups they've been added to. Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a great idea. Stars, elephants, etc. All right, so I'm going to create a new group set. The type of enrollment for the group, I want them created automatically. If you want to actually manually add students to individual marking groups, you would leave it as this first option, specifying the number of groups and then manually adding them. I would be suggesting you probably want them to be automatically created. And you would either create a set number of groups, like I made 3, and it will automatically split up all of the students in the cohort into that many groups. So if I had 3 markers, 5 markers, 2 markers, you create a number of groups based on the number of markers you have. So in this case, I'll make 2. Last time I did 3, and it will automatically split up the number of students. You can restrict it to particular cohorts, but I'm not going to bother with that today. Any new students that get added to the subject after I make these groups, I also want to be split into this structure. So I'm going to check auto enroll new users and then hit save. It's creating the groups in the background. Okay, it's creating them. If I hit F5 to update, there they are. Called group 1 and group 2. You can then click on each of those titles and change the name to whatever you like. So if this one, following Sarah's advice, we're calling the stars. And number 2, whoops, that was stars. Let's go back. It keeps alphabetically sorting them on you as you go. Elephants, there we go. Now this could be the names of your markers. It could be as generic as marker 1, marker 2, marker 3, but by default it'll be called group 1, group 2. And you'll see that it has split up the cohort of 9 as evenly as it can. Those groups are now in place, and you can then filter your view in both assignments and the gradebook and announcements if you wanted to by that group. So if I went into my assessment area, opened up that first assessment and said I only want to see the elephants, I would be going view by group, apply that, and then which group do I want? I want my new marking team there. I want to see the elephants, apply, and there they are, all 4 of them. So it's pretty easy to make marking teams using the groups tool. The only thing is just to make sure it's relatively safe in terms of the naming that you've got, because the students will be able to see the name of the group they've been added to, and you may get questions around that if it's something quite targeted, specific. Sarah.
So there's a question about really what happens if your markers have different numbers of, instead of splitting them evenly, can you nominate like one marker one, or the elephants might be 3 in that group, and we might want 23 in the stars group?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you've created the group, you're able to go back in and change the enrollments and move them around if you want to. So inside the groups tool, so I'm going to go back to groups. In the training site, this is not a particularly effective demonstration, but because it's got everyone that's ever been added to this site. So this would look a lot better in a subject site, but I'll show you how you do this. Looking at your actual marking teams, for example. So let's bring up our 2 teams that we had before. Right now, it's kind of 50-50. What I can do is check this box to select all the groups, and then next to the name of the group here, I can go into enroll users. And at that point, it will give me a breakdown of all of the students in the subject and which groups they've been added to. It shows me a count of how many there are at the top. So if I wanted to take this student out of group 1 and put them into group 2, you can switch them around and add as many as you like. That even split is just how it creates it initially. You can then move them around between all of your markers if you need to. Okay, it will give you that listing. Ignore all these other names that are in here. That's because the training site has had thousands and thousands of people added to it. All right, is that relatively clear? At that point, you have control over your marking teams, and you can move people in and around and between groups using that enroll users function.
Great.
Okay.
Lorraine?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mic there for a minute. So I did groups for one of my subjects, but I had one marker marking 60 students and markers 2 and 3 marking 30 students each. And I couldn't see a way of setting up those groups initially without making them even and then having to move them. So I just did, like you had your group set up, I just did assign manually and then just went through and clicked until I got to 60 and added them. So, but is there a way of doing that without having to do it manually and having to go back in like you just did and change students around?
So I have a suggested strategy that I propose, and usually people have different takes on this, and that is to create a base unit of marking teams rather than creating groups by the number of markers. I create a number of groups based on my smallest marking block. So what I mean by that is if I created a new category, and at this point, what I want to do is actually change the enrollment type to groups of a specific number. And I'm going to put in the number 2 here, but this can be, normally I would be thinking something like 20 or 10 as a base unit. And this will split up the cohort, no matter how many is in the cohort, into those blocks. And then I allocate a particular number of blocks to my markers. So I'd be saying, right, Lorraine, you've got groups 1 through 3. That's your 30, 60, whatever the case may be. And then I'll go, right, Rachel, you've got groups 4 through 6. So they can still use the marker view to filter, but it's just splitting up the cohort into that base unit.
So then you don't have to allocate them to
You don't have
each.
to allocate them. And at this point, usually there'll be an academic that comes off mute and says, no, I like mine to be in 17 and another marker will be 47. It's just getting into, individual choice at that point. Once you've created those particular kind of marking group base numbers, lowest common denominator, whatever you want to call it, you can still go into that enrollment view and move students around if you need to. But I found that kind of setup works pretty well. Once your markers get used to it as well. Sorry, Sarah.
No, I was
Thank
about to
you.
say, so that sort of option allows for the question that Christine has just asked as well, that, you know, if you want to swap markers, so say markers did groups 1 to 3 in the first task, they can then go 4 to 8 to mark the second task. So they're marking different students for each task.
That's
so
right.
that would work well. Yeah,
you can apply it each time it's decontextualized. So
yeah.
I suppose the thing to remember as well is when you're looking at the gradebook and the columns in the gradebook, which task, which setup you're using, for example, the names of the groups and who was marking what, all that kind of stuff. You just need to be across that. But yeah, this creates it by default, but at that point you can still go into your enrollment and move people around if you needed to at any point. And you'll see that it shows each of the groups across there, and then you can juggle them around if you need to, and it gives that number of how many in the group up the top that updates. So if you want to see that one has 60 and another has 26 or whatever, you can see that from that view.
Yeah, great. And finally, if you move students around, are the students being notified each time which group they're in? No? Okay,
they are not. The only way they know about this is if they go into communication and groups, and then they will see at that point the name of the group that they were in. So if I was, to prove I'm not lying here, let's change, and I will become Alice Logan and see what she can see. So class list and find Alice. I'm going to impersonate Alice, and okay, I'm now in the subject as Alice. If I went into communication and groups, you'll see that I can see the title of the group and the particular group that I'm in. Right, so that's what students can see. They cannot communicate with other members. They can communicate, however, back with the marker if they were inclined to use that communication tool. But yeah, that's the level of information that they have through the groups tool.
Great. Thank you.
That's okay. We'll get out of being Alice. So I think where we stopped before was talking about the gradebook and that issue of publishing and notification. So I'll talk a little bit more about ways around that if you don't want them to be notified instantly. When you publish a student's mark, either by hitting publish all in the assignment dashboard or putting anything into the gradebook, as soon as you put a score in here, it publishes, converts the students to publish, which is why they restricted access to the gradebook from some of the other roles in Brightspace. If you hide the column, which you can do by either editing the column or going into your Manage Grades area, choosing the portal that you're talking about, and editing, it goes to exactly the same screen. The hide option is listed underneath restrictions, and hide from users. It sits there at the top. So we can hit save and close. At that point, in Manage Grades, it shows me with that eye icon that it's hidden. If I look back at my Enter Grades view, there's nothing to show me here in our spreadsheet view that it's hidden. I can't see it. If I go to the standard view, again, there's nothing showing me here that it's hidden. So the only way you're going to know that these columns are hidden is by going into Manage Grades to see that icon is there or not. So you need to be aware that you're not going to know by default just looking at the gradebook that a column is hidden or not hidden. You've got to actually go into Manage Grades to see whether or not it has that icon next to it. Sarah. You're muted, sorry.
Yeah. So does that mean that everybody in task 1 is now unable to see that? Or is it just that one student?
hiding the gradebook column, it's going to be everybody, but what it is that they're affected by here is they can't see this task in My Grades. When they go to My Grades, they can't see Assessment 1 Marking Offline Demo. That's what's blocked by hiding the column. It doesn't block the actual submission portal, however. If we have a look back at our assignment dashboard, this portal is still visible. And that also means that when something is published, if you recall when we were looking at this before and we looked at Alice, she's published. That means as soon as this changed to published, she got sent an email saying that it's been marked. If this is left visible, the submission portal, the student will be notified when publishing happens. So there's two parts to this equation. One is hiding the gradebook column. The other one is hiding the submission portal. If you hide the submission portal, no one can submit. That's where this becomes slightly more complex. So I guess we revert back to my earlier sort of sentiment around I would be saving putting in the grades for this until your marking is done and you're happy for the students to get those scores.
Yeah, until after moderation. So marking, moderation, any discussions you want to have with the markers or the, about students. Don't publish anything or don't stick it in gradebook until after you've had all those discussions. So really, it's a 20 past midnight type activity. The loading the grades into the gradebook.
Now, I will say the good news is that there is an easy way to bulk upload grades into the gradebook, and maybe we might be interested in seeing that.
Yes.
Okay. So let's pretend that I hadn't hidden that gradebook column. We'll go back and undo that for a second. Manage grades. And I'm just going to unhide this. So edit. Actually, there's an option there that says make visible to users. It does exactly the same thing. See that one? So you don't have to go into restriction and hide if you don't want to. You can also do it from here. Okay, so it's now unhidden. All right, so the gradebook is just a spreadsheet. And it works in such a way that you can download that spreadsheet and you can upload that spreadsheet, and it will take anything that you want and add it to that view. Normally, when we look at the spreadsheet view, it looks a little bit closer to us with empty fields and things, but let's clear that. What we can do with the gradebook is download it, which we do by going to export up the top. What do I want to export? I want just my marking group, for example. So the convener can do this for the entire cohort. However, maybe the marker only wants to do it for their own marking team. And again, I'm going to find that marking team here. That'll do. And what do I want? I don't want all of these columns, for example. I actually just want this one. So I'm going to unselect everything. Just give me that column. First name, last name, that'll do. And hit export. And we want to export to, it's one of these. I'm going to say CSV. I think when you export to Excel, it won't allow you to bulk import as easily. So the way you want to leave it is export to CSV. It's going to give me that Excel file. This is not bad to get things like attendance lists and stuff as well if you wanted to use that at some point. Right, so here's my Excel file, my CSV. Let's open it up. And I have student names. I've got my marking portal. Now at that point, I can put my grades in here and go, right, 28, 6, and 30. There we go. 3 of them there. And save. It is now updated that CSV file that I downloaded. I can now, in my gradebook, import, export, import up the top here. I can now import that CSV, find the file. There it is. Import that and continue. No errors, that's what I want to see. Continue. This is what it's changed, a particular column with nothing out of 35 to something out of 35. That looks pretty good. So it gives you a preview of what's going to happen. And now my students have grades. So if you want to put all of those scores into a single spreadsheet, for example, do your moderation, do whatever you need to do, and then upload them in one go, this is the way to do it. Rather than dealing with the gradebook itself directly, just export the full class list and the column for the marks, get your markers to put their grades into it, and then back it goes, marking done. Remember
Fabulous.
that as soon as you import, published. That's the thing to remember. So they've all been notified now. It's all gone through. So, yep. Let me stop there and see where people want to go at this point. We are approaching time. We've got another 10 minutes or so, but happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I have a question, Lachlan.
Go ahead, Lino.
Is there a way to see that we have marked an assignment without having to click into it?
The problem is we've got draft marked and we've got publish marked.
Yeah.
Draft marked, there's no way to see that you have, other than looking at your assignment dashboard and looking at the status against each. So if I went in and had a look here underneath the student's name, if it's been draft marked, you'll see draft saved under here instead of published. So you can get that top-down view. And again, you might want to filter the view so that you're only seeing your particular marking team. Maybe you need to expand how many you're looking at once. The more files and the more students, the longer it's going to take for this screen to load. So if I had marking teams that were smaller than 50, for example, maybe I'm going to show 50, but you can see the status. Now, there are some search options which will also narrow this down, but I've found that this first view and just looking at the status underneath is probably one of the easier ways to see at a glance what needs to be marked and what's not. But underneath the search options, you can in fact look at which submissions do I want to see. I only want to see, you've got graded, unpublished, which is draft marked. That will show you everybody that's been draft marked. Preview submissions at that point is going to be only those that are those annotatable kind of documents. So it's not going to show you other types of files, etc. So you can narrow the view with this, but for me, I'm starting to get into a little bit, too finicky. I just usually like to have a look at the status to see which ones I need to go into. Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't give you a view of the score that you've given them when you were draft marking. That's the thing that's really missing here, is that view that just says, here are all the grades that I've got at the moment. I can moderate them, I can look at them, etc. We don't get that from this interface.
Yep. Okay. That's great though. Thank you.
That's okay. Anybody else at all?
Lachlan, Rachel Jefferson has asked, with the spreadsheet upload maneuver,
yep,
I'm guessing the marks, the grades yes, that you've put in, if you have a hidden grade book, they wouldn't be published until you unhide it. Is that correct?
Technically, they're still published. They're just not made visible to students under My Grades. And because they are published, it will also flow back from the gradebook into the assignment portal, change the student's status to published, and notify the student via email. So you have, if you're going to do that kind of approach, and you don't want them to know about it, you have to hide both the submission portal for the assignment. So we're talking about
and then that leads to issues with students who haven't yet submitted because the
absolutely.
portals, they're not visible for them to actually be able to submit, which to me sounds like a very dangerous path to go down.
I don't want to throw the cat amongst the pigeons here, but I will say that another school, very large, that may or may not be called nursing, takes the approach of setting up a second portal that they use specifically for late submissions. So that when it gets to a certain point, the first portal, the on-time submissions, etc., gets hidden. They do all of their marking and moderation, etc., with the column hidden and the submission portal hidden until it's ready, and then they unhide it and they get all of the late submissions to use that other portal and manage that separately. I mean, the numbers are a bit different, but something to think about process-wise if it might have some appeal. I personally think that dealing with grades and things on a spreadsheet outside of Gradebook until you're ready to put the nail in, so to speak, that's is a better approach, simpler. Now, there's one other thing I have to mention before I forget, and this has cropped up with some workplace integrated learning subjects, so it may or may not apply for you. When we were looking before at the types of documents that were added, other documents, feedback, etc., that had been attached here. Remember, we did our feedback files upload, the batch upload, and it added these in. The question that we got at that point was, how do we then export all of these for the entire cohort so we've got evidence collected somewhere outside of Brightspace? The answer is you can't unless you're going to download them all individually from here, which we don't want to do. That sounds like way too much work. If you want to collect all of these other feedback files somewhere centrally, it's not going to be in Brightspace. It's got to be outside that. So that means getting your markers to add files to SharePoint or something. I don't know. Everybody has different kind of archiving processes that are required. Some people are perfectly happy for it to stay in the LMS because we keep those records and they stay in the LMS. But that was a bit of a curveball we got from some workplace subjects where they said, we need 50 years of evidence saved somewhere locally to send off to some other, body somewhere else. You can't do it in the LMS. You got to do it before you start bulk uploading these files, getting them to collect them somewhere else. Okay. Anything else, Sarah?
No, I was just busy talking to myself.
Excellent.
Thank you again. I'm sure if people have access to this chat site, the recording will be there, and you'll send us a link too, so that will be available if you want. If you're a subject convener and you want to send this link to your markers who don't have access to Teams, I'm sure Lachlan will send that through when he can. There are a few hands up there. Okay, Lino.
Thank you. Just with extensions, is there a way to not have to go in and tick all of the people with extensions?
Yes.
Because I get so many people after the assessment saying, oh, you've pinged me for being late, but it's so cumbersome to go in and tick 400, not 400, but you know what I mean.
Look, I guess the problem is that I don't think without an integration between the automatic extensions and special cons flowing through and updating those individual student due dates, I don't think the special access option is particularly efficient. To me, the process almost seems better dealing with that spreadsheet that we talked about and your spreadsheet report that you get showing you who's got them and who doesn't, and then making your adjustments prior to putting anything back into the system. Because dealing with those special access settings and what it does to access to portals and other, it's just getting into a world of too complicated as far as I'm concerned. So I'm sorry if that's not on brand, but it's an interesting feature when you've got 5 extensions. Yeah. When there's 60% of your cohort that are getting this thing, it's, you know, just not that effective at that point. So I think you're kind of better off dealing with the dates and things like that with the report that we get from Special Cons, and with ultimately with the grades that the students have received. That way you can adjust them. You can, if you're going to provide feedback or messaging to them around it. We didn't really talk about feedback that much, but what I'm assuming is that you have adjusted the Word document that they've submitted and track changes or whatever the case that you've done with the student submission, and your feedback in there might include that. Some markers deal with the late penalties, others get the convener to deal with it. I don't know which particular tack you're taking, but ultimately, before you upload those grades into the gradebook marks, that's when you engage with late penalties. Is my take on it. Yep.
And if anyone's not quite sure about how to get that Special Cons report, in terms of students who have got an extension, I'll send through the cheat sheet again. I'll upload it into the chat site so people can have a reminder about that.
It's okay. I think I saw Joe Grimmon's hand up a minute ago. What have you got, Joe?
It's just the same question as Lynn had.
Excellent. 2 for 1.
Excellent. Great minds, you know.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, I'm mindful of the time and that people have other meetings to go to. Thank you so much, Lachlan. I'll gauge whether people want a further session.